This really happened to me. I'm telling it because the ink on the postcard still smells like ocean salt when I open the box under my bed, and because the night that changed everything is a night I can't forget. The betrayal unfolded under the bone-white chandeliers at Marble Room in downtown Cleveland, around a polished table set with heavy steak knives and a single gold envelope at the center. We were gathered for Hartwell Logistics' holiday party, cork pops, waiters gliding, everyone angling for bonuses, and that envelope was supposed to hold my promotion letter. Marlene, my VP, tapped her champagne flute with a spoon and smiled. "Tonight," she said into the microphone, "we celebrate excellence." And then she unsealed the envelope and handed my promotion to Teresa, my smug, lip-glossed coworker, while Teresa stood there grinning beside a projector, showing slide thumbnails with my name stripped from the metadata. People clapped. Someone whistled. Then my boss leaned toward me, voice light, a joke for the room. "You'll have your time, Evie. Besides, you're never leaving Ohio." The laughter went sharp as glass. The knives stayed right where they were, glinting. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I was 34 then, single, and honest to God, broken away that makes you count quarters in your car cup holder. I lived in a one-bedroom off Lorraine near the West Side Market, the kind of place that smelled like cumin and rain when the windows were open. My mother's wristwatch, silver Timex, scratched face, sat on my dresser as it had since she died. I touched it every morning like a promise. She had a way of putting her hand on your shoulder and saying, "Go see the world, Evie." And I'd nod and then stay put, because rent and groceries and fear have gravity. Working at Hartwell Logistics was supposed to be my slingshot out of that orbit. I'd built a route optimization model that could save our clients, bulk shippers on the Great Lakes, steel and grain and wind turbine parts, millions on fuel and storage. I didn't have fancy degrees, just stubbornness and nights at the Cleveland Public Library main branch until they flicked the lights. I made that deck. I booked the trial runs. I coaxed our crustiest clients. I wrote my own name into a future I could almost taste. It wasn't just the envelope that night. It was the way Teresa tucked hair behind her ear like she was trying on my life for size. It was Marlene's little stage whisper aside from the mic, "Look gracious, Evie, optics." And the way Victor, the CFO, squeezed Marlene's elbow and didn't meet my eyes. It was the way the projector kept flashing my red-labeled notes. "Run scenario B with Erie Canal detour." But the author line had been scrubbed. The slide with my benchmark from the Burns Harbor Terminal came up, and someone from accounting said, "Great work, Teresa." And I felt the room tilt like the floor was made of river water. I clapped because when a room decides a story, sometimes your only power is deciding how you'll remember it later. Afterward, at the bar, I drank a club soda like it could give me spine. Teresa sidled up, lemon twist between her fingers. "No hard feelings," she said, and I swear her lip gloss smelled like melted Jolly Ranchers. "Marlene said you weren't client-facing enough, but you're such a team player. We'll get Sloan Whitaker to renew on multi-year because of your spreadsheets." She stretched the last word like gum. I thought about all the Saturday mornings I'd spent in my apartment, hair in a claw clip, coding until my eyes hurt, while the rapid trains shuddered past. "Congrats," I said. "You stole well." Teresa flinched like I'd pinched her. "Oh, please," she said, voice flat. "Don't be dramatic. You couldn't present that deck without reading it." She smirked at my glass. "You're never leaving Ohio, Evie. Might as well make peace with being the back office girl." The back office girl. On the way home, Lake Erie was a slate of black glass. My breath fogged in the car. The only thing louder than the heater was the looping thought that I had been naive. I'd handed them everything because I thought that was how teams work, that you build something solid, they reward you, you pull your mother's watch tight, and you go somewhere new. I lay awake, hearing Marlene's spoon tap the champagne glass, hearing the hover of the room's approval around Teresa like insects around a porch light. In the Monday morning fluorescence of our open office, brick walls, succulents dying slowly, a corner view of Tower City, Teresa was already in my chair when I arrived. My mouse pad, my sticky note architecture of ideas, her perfume spangling the air. "Quick question," she chirped, clicking through files on my desktop. "Where'd you put the Sloan Whitaker letters of intent? Marlene's got a 10 a.m. Her nails were almond-shaped, white-tipped little scythes. I looked at the screen. The folder she had open was labeled, "Evie working, do not touch." She beamed at me, unembarrassed, as if the folder name was a joke I'd left for her. "I'll forward you the link," I said evenly, and opened Outlook. I sent her a link, but not to the letters. To a mirrored copy I kept on my personal drive, with the faintest watermark in the footer on page 2. Not enough to be obvious, to humans, but plenty for a forensic printout. Victor strolled by, coffee sloshing, glanced skittering past me. He wore cufflinks shaped like small anchors because he thought it made him look connected to the lakes. "Evie," he said, "Teresa will need your raw data for the Q1 board packet. Great work, by the way. Keep it up." I wanted him to keep walking. Instead, he lingered, as if waiting for me to curtsy. "This is temporary," I said. "I'll be fine." He blinked like I'd spoken a different language. "Oh, of course," he said. "Cheer up." At lunch, I took my sandwich to the Riverside steps behind the Carl B. Stokes U.S. Courthouse, not because I'm dramatic, but because sometimes I needed to look at a building that had seen fights and judgments and people telling the truth under oath. I chewed slow and watched a tugboat nose against a barge like a patient dog. My phone buzzed, an email from Teresa with my own words copied into her bullet points and the board CC'd. She'd even left one of my typos intact, hypothesize, without the second H. Tiny things like that tell on you later, if you let them. I saved the email to a hidden folder titled Timex. The suspicion took on weight the way ice forms on the lake, thin at first, then thick enough to hold. In January, I noticed a batch of invoices in our shared drive, line items to a vendor I'd never heard of, Lakefront Compliance LLC, P.O. Box in Bay Village, consulting retainer, $10,000 a month, approved by Victor's digital signature. The payment started the week after my deck demoed for Sloan Whitaker. The description line was vague: environmental and route compliance. We didn't outsource that. We had 3 people in-house, and one of them, Samir, had a baby last month and couldn't stop showing pictures that made you forgive the sleeplessness in his eyes. I asked him lightly if we'd farmed out compliance help. Samir frowned. "No? Maybe for a specific port?" He checked the list. "Never heard of them." I printed the invoice and laid it on my desk like a specimen. The logo was a picture of a gull. The font was too modern for the LLC world. I pulled the Secretary of State records for Ohio, open to the public, free, and looked up Lakefront Compliance LLC. Registered agent, Bradley & Koch, downtown law firm in the 200 Public Square building. That meant a paid service, cloaking whoever actually owned it. Victor started cutting me out of meetings. Sloan Whitaker flew into Burke Lakefront to tour our facilities, and Teresa took them to Collision Bend Brewing without me. I watched from the office window as their motorcade of black SUVs slid past on the shoreway like shiny beetles. Teresa texted me 3 low-res photos of the ribs and the view, then, "Thanks for the talking points," as if she were magnanimous. I put my phone face down. I sent myself a blind copy email of everything I had: the original deck, the sending times, the watermark, the invoice PDF, screenshots of the metadata. I created a private Google Doc titled Marble Room and began a timeline. It is a special kind of cruelty when the people who profited from your work are also the ones who try to teach you how to be small. Marlene started leaving articles on my chair, how to communicate up, with Post-it notes. That said, "This is you." She scheduled a development chat with HR and smiled at me the whole time like I was a child at her dentist office. You are such a hard worker, she told me, hands folded, engagement ring flashing. We just need to polish your edges. The thing about being humiliated is that some part of you wants to disappear before anyone sees your face. I went quiet for a week, watched, listened, waited. I noticed Teresa clocking into my spreadsheets at odd hours, midnights, and Sundays. I noticed that lakefront compliance invoices were always approved exactly 3 days after a certain routing bill from our Milwaukee client. Lakefront Compliance's P.O. box matched a P.O. box I'd seen once on Victor's desk on a thank you card. That could be coincidence, but sometimes too many coincidences lean the same way. On a Tuesday morning in February, snow twitching in the air, I caught my reflection in the elevator doors and barely recognized the woman in the green sweater. The scarf at my neck was a gift from my mother the year I graduated from Tri-C. I tightened it and went to see a lawyer. I picked the office because it was a bus ride from my apartment and because when I called, the woman who answered said, "I'm so sorry that happened," and meant it. Her name was Jasmine Yang. She worked at a small employment firm on Euclid, near Playhouse Square. I sat in a conference room that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner and told her everything. At the end, she said, "Ohio is a one-party consent state for recording. If someone tries to corner you into lying about your work, you can record." She slid me a paper to sign for representation. But first, protect yourself. Back up your files, gather your proof. Do not take anything you're not entitled to, and don't violate laws. Just keep what's yours, your work, your emails that include you. What if they try to fire me? I asked. Then we get discovery, Jasmine said kindly. Sometimes bullies write their own confessions one email at a time. That afternoon, I put my mother's watch in my pocket because I needed to feel its weight. I wore a cardigan that made me look diffuse, harmless. In the kitchen area, I waited until Victor came in for a La Croix and said, careful as a surgeon, "I think there's a misunderstanding about authorship on the Sloan Whitaker project." He smiled without teeth. "We've moved past that, Evie." His voice did a gentle condescension, the kind people use when they don't want to share the last cookie. "Focus on the spreadsheets. Not everyone's meant to be client-facing." He popped the can, bubbles rising. The tab clicked like an omen. "You're never leaving Ohio," he added, almost lazily, like it was a fact about weather. "Why do you keep saying that?" I asked. Victor looked surprised, like he hadn't realized he was speaking out loud. "Because you're safe? Reliable? Why would you leave?" He shrugged. "The world's not for everyone." "The world's not for everyone." That night I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and the tiny cactus I'd kept alive by accident. Snow blew like chalk dust past the window. I made a new deck, not for Hartwell, for me. I titled it Exit. Slide 1, the route from my apartment to Port Miami. Slide 2, Regent Seven Seas Splendor Grand Suite. I typed the number, $70,000, and felt my lungs do a strange double beat. Absolutely absurd, unspeakably huge. It wasn't that I needed that exact suite. It was that I needed a North Star that made my knees shake. Slide 3, ports, Cartagena, Barcelona, Rome, Kusadasi, Dubai. Slide 4, postcards, vintage style, each addressed to someone who told me I'd never go. The last slide was a photo of my mother's watch. Under it I typed, "Go see the world, Evie." The morning after I made that deck, HR called me in. "Concerned about your collaboration," they said. "Your tone." Marlene sat in, lips in a perfect pink bow. I asked if I could record, just so I wouldn't miss anything. "Of course," HR said brightly, not knowing it mattered. There is a kind of quiet that happens in rooms like that where they expect you to cry. I didn't. I asked why a vendor we didn't use for compliance was being paid $10,000 a month. HR glanced at Marlene, who glanced at Victor, who wasn't there. "That's not related to today's chat," HR chirped. "We're here to help you be your best self." When I came back to my desk, a sticky note had been attached to my monitor in Teresa's slanted hand. "Pal, send raw data for BODM." I looked at the request line and sent the public sanitized dataset. Teresa wrote back, "LOL no, the raw," with a winky face. I forwarded the email to Jasmine and labeled it Timex Harassment. The day the Sloan Whitaker board packet went out, I happened to be the last person in the office. Not by design, just one of those slips of fate where a janitor's radio crackles on an empty floor and the sunset turns the Cuyahoga the color of rusted pennies. I walked past the printer and saw a stack of collated pages waiting to be bound. On page 2, small as a breath, in the footer, my watermark, a pinprick of proof. I took a picture with my phone and emailed it to myself. My heart was beating so fast the photo blurred. I exhaled, took another, clear. Teresa stumbled in, cheeks flushed, an Uber waiting. "Oh, hey," she said, scooping the packet. "Gotta run this to Marlene. Big night." She winked. "They're naming me Director of Strategic Routing." I smiled so hard it felt like my face might crack. "Congratulations," I said. "You earned it." She hiccuped a laugh, too happy to hear the edge. "I know, right?" She swanned out like a swan who'd never seen a storm. I stood in the humming silence of those big windows and stared at the city that had taught me to be tough. There's a kind of electricity that starts in your fingertips when you finally got what you need. It ran up my arms and lit the back of my neck. I picked up my bag and my mother's watch and the flash drive I'd legally kept with my own work, and I went home. By Friday, Jasmine had drafted a letter, not a nuclear one, a careful one. "Concern regarding misattribution," it said, "preservation of evidence." She sent it certified to Hartwell and CC'd Bradley and Koch, in case Lakefront Compliance needed to read along. Monday morning, my badge didn't work. They made me wait in the lobby under a steel sculpture that looked like a ship's spine. A security guard stood respectfully nearby, eyes apologetic. Marlene arrived with a closed-lipped smile and a white envelope. "Streamlining," she said. "Restructuring. Best of luck." Victor wasn't there. Teresa peeked from the elevator bank like a princess from a balcony. HR offered a box for my things. I declined. "I have what matters," I said. Outside, the wind off the lake tasted like iron. I went straight to Jasmine's office. She took off her glasses, polished them on her shirt, and said, "Okay." Her voice had the steel I wanted to borrow. "We file wrongful termination, retaliation. We ask for discovery. We ask for Lakefront Compliance's ownership records." She tapped her pen against the desk. "We ask for the metadata. Meanwhile, Evie, we give them enough rope." The first file Hartwell produced in Discovery looked ordinary, a vendor agreement with Lakefront Compliance for Route Compliance Advisory, signed by Victor, witnessed by Marlene, dated 3 days after my demo. But the notary stamp? Issued by a woman whose commission had expired 2 weeks earlier. That could have been a mistake. Could have been. Then Jasmine got the bank records, subpoenaed properly, and there it was. Lakefront Compliance receiving exact transfers from Hartwell, then sending consulting payouts to a checking account in the name of KOH Logistics Partners, a shell I'd never heard of with an address that matched a P.O. box in Bay Village. KOH. My throat went cold. There's a businessman in this city known by those letters, not a rumor, a fact. He'd once sent me a LinkedIn message that started, "You're smart for a support person." I stared at the page until the black ink looked like a bruise. Jasmine flipped to the last sheet and tapped the routing number. "You see it?" she asked. "Victor's wife has an account at the same bank, same branch. I'm not saying that means anything. I'm saying I know where to look next." I thought of Marble Room, of the gold envelope, of Teresa's lemon sugar perfume. I thought of my mother's watch and the deck on my laptop titled Exit. I thought of a ship big enough to carry a grudge across an ocean and back. When I lifted my eyes, Jasmine was watching me the way a coach watches a player who finally finds the seam. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm ready to fight." The next morning, A thick manila envelope was slid under my apartment door. No return address. Inside, a single photocopy of a lakefront compliance invoice with a handwritten note in blocky pen. Ask who wrote the environmental and route compliance memos. Not Teresa. The postmark was from Westlake. My building's hallway smelled like somebody's burnt toast, but all I could smell was scandal. I called Jasmine. "Someone's scared," she said. "Good. Let's make them more scared." We filed an amended complaint. We attached my watermark photo. We attached the expired notary stamp. We included the mysterious copy. The day after the docket updated, I got a text from an unknown number. "Careful, Evie. The world isn't for everyone." The profile photo was a gray circle. My hands stopped shaking faster than I expected. I typed back, "See you in court," and then I turned on my kettle because I had the sudden irrational craving for tea. When I opened the cabinet to grab a mug, a stack of postcards I'd bought for $1 at the West Side Market slid forward and fanned onto the counter. Florida flamingos, a sepia Barcelona, a cartoon of the Amalfi Coast. I picked one up and traced the coastline with my finger. The kettle clicked. The steam rose. I flipped the postcard and wrote in my neatest hand, "Dear Marlene, the ocean looks better than your office lighting. Wish you were here to explain your notary problem. Love, Evie." I didn't mail it. Not yet. Some notes are better delivered with the judge's seal. We had our first hearing at the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas in March, the sky a white sheet. I wore the navy suit I bought at a consignment shop on Detroit Avenue, the sleeves a touch too long. Hartwell brought Jones Day, Cleveland's cathedral of a firm, with 2 partners and a junior who didn't look at me once. The judge's nameplate read, Hannah. When he asked if there were any preliminary matters, Jasmine stood. "Your Honor, we request a temporary restraining order preventing Hartwell and affiliated entities from deleting any emails, drafting documents, or vendor records connected to Lakefront Compliance, LLC. The Jones Day partner smiled and said we were on a fishing expedition. The judge, who had the weary patience of a man who had seen many expeditions, granted our order for 30 days. "Preserve everything," he said. "If I find out anything was deleted, I will consider sanctions." The partner's smile cracked a millimeter. In the hallway after, Teresa swept by in heels that clicked like a clock. She didn't look at me, didn't blink, didn't breathe. For a moment, her perfume trailed behind her like a ribbon, and I remembered the night she told me I couldn't present without reading. I tucked my mother's watch under my sleeve and thought, not everyone is meant to be client-facing. Some of us are meant to face an ocean. 2 days later, a second manila envelope came to my door. This time, a thumb drive was inside, unlabeled, black, anonymous, and a single Polaroid, a receptionist desk at Bradley & Koch, the law firm registered as Lakefront Compliance's agent. On the desk, a clipboard with a sign-in sheet. The top line read, Victor Co., 10:14 a.m. My heart stuttered. The thumb drive whirred when I plugged it into my old Lenovo. There was one folder, one file, a memo titled, Environmental and Route Compliance Draft, author tagged as E. Alvarez. Me. I scrolled, swallowed, scrolled again. The memo was my language, my notes, my phrases. The creation date preceded Teresa's promotion by 3 weeks. The last modification date coincided with Victor's signature on the vendor agreement. The final page had a track change comment from a user named MK, Marlene's initials, saying, "We'll attribute this to T for optics." My mouth went dry. I printed it. I held the paper to my chest like a shield. Then I noticed something else, small, innocuous, acid. At the bottom of the memo, the footer line with a strip of numbers I always used as a dummy checksum. My watermark. I sat there on the floor of my apartment, papers spread like a map of a coastline, and for the first time since Marble Room, I smiled without feeling it crack. The world is not for everyone, Victor had texted. He was right. It wasn't for everyone. It was for me. I didn't mail the postcards that night. I didn't book the suite. Not yet. Revenge is a calendar, not a spark. I picked up my phone to call Jasmine and froze. The phone lit with an incoming call from a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a transcription appeared on my screen. "You don't know who you're dealing with. Drop this." The voice was distorted, but fear has a rhythm that always gives itself away. I looked at the postcards on my counter, at the Polaroid of a clipboard that could sink a career, and I realized I finally had a tide at my back. I dialed Jasmine. "We have a whistleblower now," I said when she answered. "How sure?" she asked. I looked down at the memo with my watermark and the track change comment I'd read 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Then I thought of the sign-in sheet and the 17 invoices at 10 grand each. I thought of Teresa's high-heeled click and Marlene's spoon on crystal and the projector blinking my slides in a room that decided too quickly to believe a fiction. "Very," I said. "And they just told us where the bodies are buried." "Then we dig," Jasmine said. "And Evie?" "Yeah?" "When it's over," she said, the corner of her voice audibly smiling, "send me a postcard." I turned the Barcelona card over, uncapped my pen, and wrote her name as neatly as I could before the ink bled a little from my shaking hand. But as I finished the first line, the hallway outside my apartment creaked, slow and deliberate, and a soft shadow drifted beneath my door like smoke, pausing there as if listening, as if measuring how quietly a life could be kicked open. The shadow lingered at the base of my door like it had a decision to make. I stood perfectly still, the memo warm in my hands, tea steaming over my postcards like fog over a harbor. Every building has its own night sounds. Ours creaked and chimed with old pipes, but this felt like breath held on the other side of painted wood. I slid the memo pages under a cutting board so they wouldn't crinkle in my hands and stepped closer to the peephole. The hall light hummed. Someone's shoulder brushed the frame. A cuff, dark wool, came into the fisheye view, then a slow retreat, weight on the balls of their feet, as if trying not to wake the building. The shadow paused, then a soft whisper of paper kissed the floor, and the person walked away fast, quiet in a way that only people who've practiced can manage. I waited until the elevator shuddered somewhere below. Then I reached down and picked up a tri-folded sheet of printer paper. No envelope. Block letters again. Drop it, or everyone sees what you did with the numbers. The kettle clicked off behind me like a camera shutter. I laughed once, sharp, a sound like a coin hitting tile. The thing about fear is that it comes with instructions, theirs and yours. Theirs said, dig a hole and lie in it. Mine said, call the lawyer, copy the files, do not let them set the story about you in cement. I sent Jasmine a photo of the note. She texted back in 60 seconds. Do not respond, screenshot, save original. We add to motion. Also, stay with a friend. I stared at the suggestion and realized I didn't have anyone I wanted to call at midnight who wouldn't hear the wobble in my voice and try to fix it with casseroles. What I had was my mother's watch, a lawyer, and a stack of postcards that were becoming something like a promise. I put the note in the Timex folder with careful hands and slid my deadbolt twice. The next morning, Lake Erie looked like a sheet of hammered tin. I walked to Phoenix Coffee on West 9th early and sat at a table where I could see the door. The thumb drive from the manila envelope weighed in my coat pocket like a dare. Jasmine arrived with a woman I hadn't met, mid-40s, ponytail, camel coat. Evie, this is Nora, Jasmine said. Private investigator. She used to be an investigative reporter at the Plain Dealer. Nora shook my hand like a coach. People are always sloppier than they think, she said, sitting. You'd be stunned how often a cover-up is just a shopping bag with a bank receipt in it. I slid the Polaroid and the thumb drive across the table. Whoever's sending me these wants the rot out, I said, or they want me to think that. We can work with either, Nora said cheerfully, plugging a small phone-sized gadget into the drive to check for malware. Clean, she said. Let's talk Bay Village. She tapped the P.O. box number on the lakefront compliance invoice copy and raised her eyebrows. "I've got a car and a camera. Want to take a little field trip?" We drove west, past the curve of the shoreway, where the water always looks like it's thinking of climbing out. Bay Village had the tidy serenity of money that had chosen not to be flashy about it. Lawn flags, two-car garages, kids in puffer jackets pedaling scooters. The United States Post Office branch sat neat on Dover Center Road, a sleepy one-story with a flag snapping in the cold, and a notice about passport appointments taped inside the glass door. We parked in a spot where we could see the P.O. boxes through the lobby window. Nora set her camera on the console and settled in like a birder waiting on a rare hawk. "Did you record HR?" she asked casually, eyes on the door. "Yes," I said. "Ohio's one-party consent." "Good," she said. "Record everything, even your thoughts if you could." She smiled sideways. "People like the ones you're describing? They bank on you being the kind of person who doesn't want to make a fuss. They groom whole office cultures around that." At 10:18 a.m., a silver Lexus pulled in. The woman who got out was in yoga pants, hair in a high messy bun, sunglasses despite the gray, and a coat that whispered wealth. She was chatting on speakerphone when she passed the window. "He says he'll get Victor what he needs." And I felt heat rise under my skin like a blush that wanted to be a bruise. Nora held the camera steady, clicked 2 low-sound shots, and made a tiny, satisfied noise in her throat. The woman went to the back, unlocked a box, pulled a stack of mail, tucked it into a leather tote, and left in a blur of vanilla perfume. "That's Victor's wife," I said, voice flat. I'd seen her once at a United Way gala I got invited to because my boss needed a seat filled. She'd laughed big and twice touched my arm when she couldn't remember my name. "The bank records Jasmine got, same branch near Westlake," I said. "Same person?" It felt obscene, how small the world could be when bad people chose to keep it small. "We'll run plates," Nora said, already tapping a notepad app with 2 fingers. "And we'll pull the post office's public camera feed if we can get it without a warrant, but for now, we have her at the box." "Why use your wife?" I asked, staring after the Lexus tail lights. "Why take that risk?" "Because that's the kind of risk you take when you think you own the place," Nora said lightly. "And sometimes because you need a person you trust to fetch cash while you keep your hands soft." By the time we got back downtown, Jasmine had filed our motion to compel production of Lakefront Compliance's ownership records and the Bradley and Koch visitor logs. She added the anonymous Polaroid as an exhibit. She added the new threat note. "We'll ask for an ex parte protective order if this escalates," she said over the phone. "It's already ugly. Let's make ugly very expensive for them." That afternoon, I set a trap. Teresa had asked for raw data in that winky way the weak adopt when they think they've won. I created a data set that looked legitimately messy. Real numbers, but with a tiny seeded anomaly invisible to the casual eye. A stream of nulls that would self-correct with the right preprocessor. Anyone who knew the routing script, as I did, would run the preprocessor and have clean numbers. Anyone who didn't, say, someone who only knew how to present, would paste the data set into a new sheet and proudly send it upward with a flaw that, on a graph, would kink like a bad back at exactly the 58-day mark. The code that created the anomaly would log the device username that opened it and send me an email, ping with a timestamp, all entirely above board with my own property. I sent the file to Teresa with a note, "Per your request," IBCC'd Jasmine. I labeled the email Timex Chalk Trap. At 11:07 p.m., my phone pinged. Device, Teresa MacBook, timestamp. Data opened. I swallowed, half laughing. The next morning, an office-wide email from Victor chirped, "Exciting trend lines on Sloan Whitaker." The first graph had my kink at day 58. I took a screenshot. I filed it under when the story writes itself. By noon, Nora had sent me 3 photos of the Lexus driver confirming her identity with a reverse search and an old Society section article. An hour later, Jasmine messaged, "Jones Day wants a meeting." "Why?" I wrote. She replied, "They say they want to resolve matters before discovery gets burdensome. They're offering a settlement with NDA." The dollar amount made my throat tighten. It was just enough to make the average person say yes if they were tired. It was not enough to buy justice, and it was not enough to buy a grand suite on a ship cutting across the Atlantic under a sky my mother wanted me to see. "Tell them I want the truth more than the check," I texted back. "And if they want to bury this, it'll cost them a suite with a balcony." She sent a laughing emoji, and then, more seriously, "You sure?" I looked around my apartment. The plant I'd managed to keep alive, the mug drying on the rack, my mother's watch face catching a slice of sun. "Yes," I wrote, "make discovery burdensome." That weekend, while Cleveland did its late winter gray smudge thing, I sat at the big central table at the Cleveland Public Library main branch under a skylight like a clear bruise, and I wrote letters to the past. Not to mail, not yet. This was a ritual. "Dear Teresa," I wrote on one postcard, "Rome smells like espresso and stone, not like your copy of my deck." "Dear Victor, Barcelona says hi. She has your wife's P.O. box number." Memorized. "Dear Marlene, the captain announced we're approaching the Strait of Gibraltar. He says to bring your notary stamp if you want to watch us pass through." The act of writing steadied something in me that felt rattled since Marble Room. I tucked the cards into an old stationery box with my mother's handwriting on the lid and brought the lid to my nose like a secular prayer. On Monday morning, I met a woman at Blue Door Cafe in Cuyahoga Falls who had requested to remain off every record. She was a compliance analyst from Hartwell who'd left 6 months earlier. "Burnout," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee so it made little galaxies. Also because they started making decisions I couldn't explain if anyone asked. She slid me a copy of 2 internal memos, both watermarked draft. The language was mine on one, torn through and brightened like an Instagram filter. The other was new, a roll-up of compliance approvals that had sailed through too fast for comfort. "The sign-off sequence is wrong," she said quietly. "Marlene shouldn't have that authority. She never did. It was changed, retroactively." She touched the edge of the paper like it might bite. "I thought you should know." "Why risk telling me, Pat?" I asked. She smiled in a way that made her look suddenly shy. "Because I sat in that holiday party once," she said. "Different year, same chandelier, and because my sister keeps a shoebox of postcards from when she was in the Navy, she told me to ask myself who I wanted to be when I told this story later." By Friday, our motion to compel was granted. Bradley and Koch had to produce their lakefront compliance client file under the crime fraud exception. Jones Day argued about privilege in a way that made the judge's jaw work like he was chewing the world's driest granola bar. He gave them 7 days. "You can redact Social Security numbers, not crimes," he said, the way a man says he's tired of being lied to in his own house. Victor went on a philanthropic tear that week. It's a Cleveland thing. You do something generous and let a photographer capture you handing over a big check. He was at the Cleveland Clinic's Children's Gala, standing next to a banner that said, "Hope." He was at the Union Club in a tux that fit like it hadn't been sitting in the closet. He gave a speech at the City Club about the importance of calibrating risk, and the plain dealer ran a photo of him with a hand on his heart. People shared it on LinkedIn like prayer beads. Teresa posted a selfie from a client dinner at Marble Room with the caption, "So grateful to learn from the best." I stopped checking her feed when it felt like staring at the sun and hoping it wouldn't burn. Hartwell started to look untouchable. When you're small and you go up against a machine, it's not just the gears that grind you, it's the oil of public approval, the hum of a narrative that says the company gives, scholarships, and therefore cannot do harm. I had to remind myself that I wasn't fighting a story. I was assembling a sequence of facts that would create one of their own. Discovery began to cough up miracles. Bradley and Koch's visitor logs showed Victor 3 times in 1 week, then twice with someone logged as T. Henley with no ID number, Teresa's last name. Building security footage stills, slightly blurry, showed Marlene's coat in the lobby and the edge of a man's anchor-shaped cufflink as he held the door with exaggerated courtesy. The lakefront compliance engagement letter, finally produced, had a sentence that was almost funny if it hadn't been theft. Contractor shall provide advisory services for presentation by designated company representative. Designated, as in, the story had been written before the first slide appeared on any projector. A journalist from Cleveland.com started leaving voicemails with the kind of polite persistence that builds front-page headlines. "I hear there's a case that could ripple," he said. Jasmine told me to hold. "Press helps and hurts," she said. "Right now, we want them quiet and sloppy. If they see themselves in print, they get careful." That same afternoon, Nora texted, "You up for a drive?" We went west again, not to the post office this time, but to a strip of stores in Westlake, where a mailbox rental place had a row of private boxes that looked like old safe deposit doors. We parked and watched. At 3:22 p.m., a man in a wool coat and a ball cap pulled low, parked badly across 2 spots, went inside, and came out with an armful of glossy envelopes. He tucked them into a messenger bag with corporate logos half scraped off. He looked around once, quick and practiced. When he turned his head, the cap slipped enough for me to see his face. My stomach did a slow roll. "That's Leonard," I said. "Hartwell's outside counsel for petty stuff. Parking tickets for the fleet. HR paperwork." I remembered him from an afternoon he'd brought donuts to make a termination feel like a party, and I had hated him for the icing sugar on the pink firing file. "Everyone thinks they're doing the small thing," Nora said, her camera quiet. "Everyone forgets the small things add up." That night, I got a call from an unknown number. It wasn't a distortion this time. It was Teresa. "Evie," she said, and I could hear clinking in the background, ice in a glass, forks on plates, a restaurant. "Can we talk?" "Talk," I said, sitting on my bed because my knees had decided they might not participate otherwise. "It's gotten out of hand," she said, voice too high, words tumbling. "Victor's saying I need to deny everything. Marlene says you're vindictive. Look, I didn't know about the invoices, I swear. He told me the vendor was vetted. He told me I was the face because you get nervous." Her inhale sounded like a sob. She was trying to keep under her tongue. "I just wanted power," I said lightly. "A title, your name in print." "I wanted out of Illyria," she snapped, then caught herself. "I wanted what you wanted, but you weren't going to get it." Her voice softened. "Come on, Evie, let's not pretend. They don't pick people like us to sell to people like them." "Then why are you calling me?" I asked. She was quiet for a heartbeat, and I could hear faintly a sommelier describing tannins to someone bored. "Because it's going to get worse," she said, "and because you're not the only person who puts watermarks on things." I sat up straighter. "What does that mean?" I asked. She exhaled. "I saved everything," she said. "Every draft you sent me, every edit Marlene forced, every DM from Victor. I thought, if he ever tried to take my name off, to keep it." Her breath wobbled. "Now I think maybe I was keeping it for you." "Then why throw me under the bus at Marble Room?" I asked, voice cool, because if I let it warm up I would scream. "Because I wanted to live under a chandelier for once," she said. "Fine, I'm a bad person. You can say it out loud, but I'm not stupid. I can see which way this wind is blowing, and Victor is handing me an umbrella full of holes." "Send me what you have," I said. "On one condition," she said quickly, fear making her slick. "You keep me out of prison?" "I can't promise that," I said. "I'm not the judge." "Then why would I?" "Because they will not keep you out either," I said, and the tone in my voice surprised both of us. "Because you're a witness whether you like it or not." Because if you help me, it will go better for you. Because you know what they do with faces they don't need anymore. I pictured Victor at the city club, his hand on his heart. They stopped tagging you on posts. Teresa made the kind of sound people make when they step off a curb and think the street is there, then discover it's a river. I'll think about it, she said, and hung up. Jasmine called an hour later. Jones Day finally coughed up part of the Bradley and Coke file, she said, voice bright like she couldn't stop smiling. Evie, they redacted names, sure, but they missed one footnote. A very helpful intern forgot to black out the author metadata on the PDF before they printed. The original Lakefront Compliance Scope memo was written by EA and JY has a screenshot. That's you. I pressed my palm to my sternum. And the signatory? I asked. They blacked it out, she said, except for the K and the H. Co, I said softly. Oh, and one more thing, Jasmine added, like it was an afterthought, but her voice hinted at fireworks. The judge scheduled a hearing on sanctions. There's a forensic gap in Hartwell's email server logs right after the TRO. Someone tried to scrub. My apartment went very still. Somewhere outside, a siren made its lonely wail. Who? I asked. They didn't sign the deletion, Jasmine said, but whoever did it did a bad job. The server copied the headers to a legacy archive. I pictured an IT guy with a tremor in his left hand, deciding whether he wanted to keep his job or his conscience. Two names pop up a lot on the threads that survived, she continued, Marlene and Teresa. I stared out the window where the streetlights turned the new snow the color of old paper. Teresa called me tonight, I said. She says she has everything. Then she should bring everything, Jasmine said, and soon. My phone buzzed, an email from a burner account, a Google Drive link, no subject. I swallowed, clicked. Dozens of files populated the screen, drafts with my file name conventions, track change PDFs with notes from MK, text strings of DMs from Victor telling Teresa where to stand, what to say, when to laugh. A photo of a check with Lakefront Compliance LLC in the memo line under a nonsensical description. Employee wellness, written in Victor's careless hand. Audio files, short, tinny, of a voice that sounded like Marlene saying, "Take Evie's slides, soften the math, she spooks them." And then a whisper I hadn't realized I could recognize until I heard it. "You're never leaving Ohio, Evie," in Victor's half-laughing tone, recorded like a curse he'd cast on himself. I downloaded everything to 2 drives and printed the index page like it was a birth certificate. Then I opened my stationery box and addressed a new postcard in my neatest script. Dear Teresa, thank you. I'll send this on the water so the postmark smells like the apology you didn't give me. I didn't go to sleep. I made tea. I stacked the documents into a chronology so clean it could cut. At dawn, with my apartment full of the murmuring paper of a life about to change shape, my buzzer sounded. The voice that came through was male, official, too early for good news. Ms. Alvarez, he said. Detective Ben Szymanski, Cleveland PD. We need to talk about your former employer, and we need you to come with us now. Detective Szymanski had that broad-shouldered Cleveland cop look, Polish last name stitched over a parka that had seen 100 Lake Erie winters. He and a second detective stood outside my door in the lemony morning light, breath fogging, hands visible. We're not here to arrest you, he said before my heartbeat could finish its sprint. We have a warrant to collect evidence. Someone inside Hartwell finally stopped being brave in the abstract and started being useful in the concrete. I let them in. The apartment smelled like tea and paper, and a little like the thrifted sandalwood candle I'd been rationing. The detective sat at my table with its bloom of documents. Szymanski ran a slow eye over the pile like a man counting cards. Ms. Alvarez, he said, you've been busy. I had help, I said, and told him about Jasmine, about Nora, about the manila envelopes and the boxes with neat block letters. He listened without interrupting, except once, when I said the words, one-party consent, and he nodded like I'd just installed a deadbolt on my life. They signed and copied and bagged. I handed over the burner link with Teresa's files after duplicating them again because fear and prudence share a filing cabinet. Szymanski's partner, a woman named Deaver, snapped photos of every page like she was taking pictures of animals right before they disappeared. When they were done, Szymanski slid a card across the table. "You'll get a call from an assistant county prosecutor today," he said. "Wire fraud, honest services fraud, maybe conspiracy? Once we saw what your lawyer filed, the crime fraud exception, that pried open some doors." He paused, looked at the Timex watch on my wrist, then at the postcards covered in names. "You've got good instincts," he said. "Bad people hate that." He stood to leave, then turned back at the door like he'd remembered one thing he wanted to say and wasn't sure if it was the right time. "Off the record," he said. "I've got a daughter. She's 22. First job. They give her the Be Nice song and dance, and then lift her work. Sometimes I think the only difference between a mugger and a CFO is a tux." I didn't know what to do with the sudden human weight of that, so I told him the truth. "The night they did it to me, Tio," I said, "I thought I'd never leave Ohio." He smiled, something sad and real. "Don't let a thief decide your travel plan," he said, and left me with a quiet that wasn't empty anymore. It was full of wheels starting to turn. The assistant county prosecutor, a woman named Patel, with a voice like a neat stack of case law, called by noon. "We'd like to meet," she said, "and Ms. Yang as well. We're coordinating with the Ohio AG's office and the U.S. Attorney. Sometimes the county is the dock and the feds are the ocean." She chuckled, and I wondered if every lawyer in Cleveland had a metaphor for bodies of water ready to go. We met in a windowless conference room at the Justice Center that afternoon, the same building where I'd once eaten a sandwich outside just to feel steadied by its granite. Patel laid out the map. Victor's shell, KOH Logistics Partners, receiving money through lakefront compliance. Marlene signing where she lacked authority. Leonard fetching mail like a faithful dog. The missing notary date. The server gaps after the preservation order. "We can charge on what we have," Patel said, "but cooperation gets us safer footing." She looked at me with keen sympathy. "I know you're a civil plaintiff. We won't ask you to do anything that compromises your case. But if you're willing to continue recording as a private citizen under Ohio law..." She let the suggestion hang like a bridge. I stepped onto it. 2 nights later, I met Marlene at the Marble Room bar because symmetry was a dare I wanted to win. I wore a black dress that made me feel like a version of myself I hadn't let breathe. Competent, composed, taller than my heartbreak. I set my phone in my clutch where the mic could drink in her voice like expensive gin. Marlene arrived with a posture like a blade. "You look well," she said, as if we were 2 women who'd exchanged recipes and not a thief and the person she'd tried to make small. I ordered a club soda to match the one I'd clutched the night they took my future and used it as a centerpiece. "I want to put this behind us, she began, leaning in, diamond catching light like a false lighthouse. "Hartwell wants to be generous. We can do a number that would make you feel valued in exchange for your cooperation and a mutual non-disparagement agreement." She smiled like a careful dentist. "This is how adults do it." "How adults do what?" I asked. "Take what isn't theirs and ask for a tip?" She flinched, then recovered. "Optics matter." She dropped the word like it was a boutique brand. "You weren't ready to be client-facing. Teresa has a way with people. It made sense. Designated representatives. It's practically standard." I let her dig, nodding, making little noises like a person trying to be reasonable. Then I said, as simply as I could, "Why did Victor route money through lakefront compliance to KOH Logistics Partners?" Her eyes blanked like a screensaver. "I don't know what those words are," she said. The recording caught the lie like a moth in amber. "Because it's odd," I continued, voice mild, "that environmental and route compliance memos would be authored by me and paid to a vendor that doesn't do compliance. Odd that your notary stamp belonged to a dead commission. Odd that the vendor's P.O. box collects mail from Alexis with a woman I saw at a City Club gala on Victor's arm. I smiled. Odd that you thought the story started at optics when it started at theft. Evie, she said, steel scraping porcelain. If you go to war with this company, you will lose. Her hand tightened on her glass. You're a spreadsheet girl from Lorraine. We're the room with the microphone. Not tonight, I said. Tonight, I'm the room where you say that sentence into a microphone. She stared at me with an expression that made me think of a chandelier shaking the second before it crashes. The recording got the silence, too. It got everything. The county moved with the inevitable pace of big systems once the bolts have been loosened. Grand jury subpoenas went out. Patel looped in the feds. A forensic accountant pointed to the line where money changed shape, the same way a river looks calm, and the undertow. Rips your legs out. The plain dealer didn't print a headline yet, but a reporter called again, and this time, on Jasmine's advice, I said, on background, a whistleblower case may be imminent. Watch the docket. It was like whispering fire into a crowded theater and hearing 1,000 throats inhale. A week later, Teresa walked into the Justice Center alone in a white coat that made her look like a lab tech about to admit she'd dropped a beaker. Her lawyer met her at security. They sat across from Patel while I watched through a glass pane that made everyone's skin look like paper. I didn't know about the shell, Teresa said, voice shredding in all the right places and maybe some honest ones too. I told her I didn't know. He said it was vetted. He said my name would sell it. She slid a thumb drive across the table with a little flourish of desperation. I saved everything. Patel reached over and, with a small nod at me, collected the flash drive like a ferry collects one more passenger before it pulls from the dock. 3 days after that, FBI agents walked through the revolving doors at Bradley and Koch with jackets that said police in a font that made denial seem silly. They left with boxes. The United States Attorney held a press conference in front of the Carl B. Stokes U.S. Courthouse, where I used to eat sandwiches in the cold. His tie flapped in a wind that wanted to make this a picture we'd remember. He said words like conspiracy and honest services fraud and wire. He said a name with 3 letters, then spelled it K-O-H. The photo of Victor in handcuffs exiting a black SUV ran on Cleveland.com, the News 5 segment, and then everywhere. The comments were a rotating buffet of astonishment, schadenfreude, and a handful of LinkedIn warriors insisting we should wait for all the facts, like the facts weren't slapping their faces with each refresh. Hartwell's board released a statement that had the rhetorical texture of dry toast. We are deeply disappointed to learn of irregularities, they wrote. They put Marlene on leave, which is corporate for We Saw the Iceberg, and the band will keep playing until the water is at their ankles. Leonard, the donut-bearing executioner, discovered that parking tickets were the least of his legal worries. Victor's wife was charged with conspiracy to commit mail fraud for the P.O. box runs. The Lexus in the photo was towed from a driveway where the wind had finally knocked over a realtor's sign that had read, "Luxury is a choice," in a font that suddenly felt like a dare. Victor's arraignment looked like every arraignment. Tired wood, tired faces, someone wearing a suit that didn't belong to him. His lawyer argued he wasn't a flight risk. Patel argued he was a risk to every server log between West 6th and Westlake. The judge set conditions and deadlines. Outside the courthouse, Teresa stood with her hair back and her hands shaking. She looked at me like a person who'd realized the mirror is a witness. "I'm sorry," she said, and it didn't fix anything, but you could hear that she meant it. "You can say it," she added, "that I'm a bad person." "You were," I said. "Maybe you'll be better now." She pressed her lips together like she was trying not to let an answer spill out that would anchor her to the worst version of herself. "I hope you get to go," she said softly. "The places you wrote on those postcards." For a second we stood in the same wind. The civil case ripened like fruit and sun. Jones Day called with a new tone in their voices. Cautious, choir boy. We'd like to talk global resolution, they said, and then an email with a number so large my stomach went sweet and sour at once. No NDA, I told Jasmine, and an apology, written, on letterhead. She said, "You're asking them to slice a piece off their cathedral and hand it to you." "Good," I said. "I want to use it as a door stop." Negotiations are a movie where no one looks good in the lighting. They called me unreasonable. I said, "I have a recording of your VP calling me a spreadsheet girl and telling me the company picks faces, not work." They said, "We can't give you that number without confidentiality." I said, "You can keep 2 zeros and your secrecy, or add the zeros and let me tell the truth." There was a silence in which 1,000 billable minutes held their breath. Then a revised offer, 7 figures that began with a number my father would have called un-American, and my mother would have called a miracle, plus a public admission of misattribution and corporate governance reforms. I told Jasmine I wanted my name restored in the record for Sloan Whitaker, even if someone had to print new board packets and hand-deliver them to every person who had ever been fooled. We settled. A judge signed. The docket updated. Hartwell posted a press release on their site that tried to be formal and ended up human. "We regret that the contributions of Ms. Evie Alvarez were not properly credited. We are implementing changes to ensure that our culture reflects our values. Corporate values, forced at knife point, can begin to look like actual values if you keep the knife visible long enough. The criminal case moves slower, as it should. Lives end up in those files." Victor pled to conspiracy and wire fraud with a statement that read like it had been scrubbed with steel wool. Marlene was charged with falsification and tampering with records. Leonard settled his charges to a lesser count that says the only thing he could honestly say, "I made a choice." Teresa, cooperating, pled to a misdemeanor and received probation, community service, a ban from positions of fiduciary trust for 5 years, and the exquisite punishment of living with herself. The law firm paid a fine that made them wince. The notary's expired commission became a training manual. Don't be sloppy in service of a lie. I slept for 3 days and woke up with a hunger that felt like the first day of spring in a city that never gets enough. Then I did something I'd never done. I stepped into the center of my own life and spent money like hope. Port Miami glowed the color of citrus candy when I rolled my carry-on up the gangway of the Regent Seven Seas Splendor. The grand suite on Deck 9 was carved out of a fantasy I had as a kid, staring at National Geographic magazines in the Lorain County Library. A balcony big enough to host a forgiveness ceremony, a living room with a pale sofa and a bowl of green apples that could have been a painting, a bed that looked like an apology for every night I'd slept with my jaw clenched. The bathroom had marble like a more expensive earth. The butler, my butler, handed me a glass of something that fizzed with the sound of a good verdict. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Alvarez," he said. I looked at the ocean and thought, let them all learn to pronounce it. The first postcard I sent went out before we even cleared Dodge Island. "Dear Detective Szymanski," it read, "there's a horn on this ship that sounds like a promise kept. Thank you for knocking." I addressed one to Nora. "Dear Nora, the Strait of Gibraltar looks like a story's spine. You were right about shopping bags and bank receipts." To Jasmine, "Dear Jasmine, they're laying out tea in a lounge where the ceiling is painted like a morning that never ends. I brought your name to the rail and let the breeze hold it for a second before giving it back. To my father, who'd never forgiven himself for smallness. Dear Dad, I know you were trying." To my mother, "Dear Mom, I touched the watch before I stepped onto the balcony. It ticked like a blessing. Cartagena smelled like diesel and mango in the past." I mailed a postcard from a stucco post office where the clerk had a gold tooth and said "Buen viaje" with the sincerity of a benediction. "Dear Marlene," I wrote, "I walked the walls of the old city and learned that fortresses fall from the inside first. The stamp I chose had a ship on it." I gave the card to the clerk and watched his hand take it away like he was taking one stone out of a palace. At sea, under those big empty skies that make your thoughts bloom and sharpen at the same time, I sat on my balcony with a legal pad and wrote down every lesson I'd bought with my heart. That humiliation can be a map if you look at which corner it sets on fire, that friends can arrive after the party as easily as before, that the law moves slow, but it moves, that sometimes you have to be the person who says out loud, no. The ocean obeyed nothing but the moon and the math of its own existence. We cut a blue road so bright it looked like a painter had been here first. Barcelona's Correos building holds a rush of noise that feels like a market. I bought stamps from a woman who inked them with ceremony. Dear Victor, I wrote in my neatest script, did you know that if you put your hand on a cathedral stone, you can feel every person who thought they owned it, then left? I drew a tiny anchor next to my name and shaded it in until it didn't look like a promise anymore. It looked like a weight. In Rome, Civitavecchia if we're precise, and we are, I got up at 5, took the train, and followed a guidebook's stern instructions to the postbox near Campo de' Fiori before coffee because the universe loves a pilgrim who commits. Dear Teresa, I wrote, I saw the Caravaggios tucked into side chapels like secrets the church loved and hated in the same breath. People knelt with their phones up. I thought of you. Pick better altars. Cushadasa gave us Ephesus, colonnades and cats, and a sky so exact it felt like being corrected. I mailed a postcard to myself from a tiny shop where the man behind the counter wanted to know how many days I would stay alive in Turkey, and then started telling me haunted stories of the Silk Road. Dear Evie, I wrote, remember the quiet you wished for and then the noise you learned to make. Remember your mother's watch kept time even when the lake froze. Remember you did not become smaller just because they said you should fit in a pocket. We had days at sea that tasted like salt and library books. I ate breakfast with the horizon and learned to say good morning to strangers without flinching. People asked what I did, and I said the truth. I sent a thief to court, and then I left the state. One night, the cruise director held postcard hour in the observation lounge with free stamps and a bar set up like a map. I brought my box and wrote one more card to Marlene I didn't send. Dear M, I thought of how you tapped a champagne glass to get the room's attention and then poured my life into someone else's mouth. I thought of how the judge's pen sounded when it started to write your name where you didn't want it, and how all I could think was that sound is the opposite of your spoon. I slipped the card into my box to keep, a fossil. Dubai was heat and glass and impossible fountains. I mailed a last card to Patel at a counter where the clerk looked at the address like it was a puzzle and then smiled because sometimes puzzles are just mail with a plane ticket. Dear Ms. Patel, the postcard said, I read somewhere that justice is a tide. I think it's also a ship's wake, bright for a long time after the engine passes, telling you which way the truth went. Thank you for following. On the final evening, the butler set 2 flutes on the balcony rail, and I poured one onto the sea like an offering for every version of me that had been told the world wasn't hers. I kept the other and touched my mother's watch with my free hand and listened, the ship's low tremor, the water's gossip, my own pulse learning a new tempo. My phone buzzed with a news alert I hadn't turned off yet. Victor sentenced to 8 years, restitution. Ordered, assets seized, a quote from the judge about breach of public trust. Marlene fined, barred from executive positions for a decade. Hartwell's board chair resigned with a letter that included the word reckoning. A final email popped in from Teresa at a probation office address that looked like humility. I hope you're happy, she wrote. I mean it. I typed back. I am learning. Then I powered my phone down and let the horizon decide what came next. When the ship turned north, the air took on that thin clarity you get right before morning. I opened my box and took out the first postcard I'd written months earlier, the one to my mother that I hadn't mailed because there wasn't an address where she was, and I read it again, mouthed the words like prayer, and tucked it back, its edges softened by all the miles it hadn't had to travel to get where it needed to go. Somewhere far away, Lake Erie moved against the breakwall with the patience of a place that has seen 1,000 departures and 1,000 returns. They said I'd never leave Ohio. They said I was a back office girl, a spreadsheet girl, a support person, a safe bet. But the thing no one tells you is that tides aren't gentle. They yank. And when the horn sounded and the ship answered the sky, I held the old Timex to my ear and heard the ocean teach the lake how to let go. The end.